Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Mission Matters. My name is Adam Torres, and if you'd like to apply to be a guest in the show, just head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, so today I have Katherine Mulhern on the line, and she is the board chair and chief executive officer over at Restitution Capital. And this episode is part of our Milken Global Conference coverage series, where we bring you the best of people that attended the conference, panelists, speakers, VIPs, all of the above. Katherine, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks so much for reaching out. It's really great to be here.
All right, Katherine. So a lot to talk about. So of course, I want to get into restitution capital. And we're going to get into how the tools of capitalism, how those are working, and what restitution capital is doing, and some of the solutions that you've come up with at your company. And also, before we get into all of that, I do want to talk a bit about the Milken Global Conferences. People that have been listening to this series for a long time know I call it like my Super Bowl of conferences. So I have a ball every year I go. What your experience with the conference? How'd you get introduced? Where do you want to start? Like, talk about your experience, please.
Yeah, no, sure, happy to. Well, it actually really started because I had been speaking to some of the Milken folks in London, and they had mentioned that part of their focus is really around impact and sort of how capitalism and the private sector can create a larger impact. So there was a philosophical element to their work that we found very interesting. I
Mm.
was very lucky as well because one of our advisors is also quite close to Milken, and he was very instrumental in getting us in to the conference. It was our first conference, my first conference with Milken.
Oh, newbie. So
Yeah, I was
tell me,
very
how was it?
excited.
This is
It
great. I
was
remember my
great.
first Milken conference just like it was the other day, but go ahead, you please.
Yeah, so no, it was great. It was so interesting because even in the hallway, you would meet people who would just be exchanging ideas. The one thing I did say at the end, because I stayed for the full conference and I was sitting next to a reporter, and we both said, we wish there were more chairs. Because they make you stand and circulate all the time. But it was, yeah,
Oh,
it
that's
was.
it. That is true. I feel like, and even if they added more, that we'd still need more. And it keeps it's overflowing, and it's fun too. 'Cause to me, it's fun because it's like you're on this little island almost because of what they do with the Beverly Hilton. It just you can't get in. You can get out, obviously, but you can't get in without the right badge and the credentials. And then when it gets to lunchtime or something else, you're like hunting for chairs. It's funny. You're right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and we were actually the invitation came from Rachel Goldstein, who is the
Mm,
director of global programming, and she was really instrumental in making sure that we had a very interesting panel, which was focused more on espionage, actually, but because so much
mm.
of our work really looks at illicit financial flows and how to, in a sense, monetize illicit financial flows, it really
Hmm.
fit in very well. It was very interesting.
Yeah, that's a great transition. So let's get a bit into restitution capital. So maybe start by telling us a little bit more about the firm.
Sure. So, and really to talk about the firm is to talk about the founders.
Hmm.
So, all of us who are involved in Restitution Capital, there are seven, now eight of us who are working on this project. And we all really came from different backgrounds. We're quite senior in our fields. So,
Hmm.
and it includes investigators. So, we have the former head of the anti kleptocracy unit of the FBI, who's our chief investigator. It includes very senior lawyers, but also human rights professionals and development professionals, and people who have worked in and around governments for years. And all of us really came together because we saw, in a sense, two things. One is a real problem, which was around sort of the extraction of illicit financial flows from countries primarily in the global south who were being victimized by larger actors, but
Mm.
also essentially a market issue where these countries and the people of these countries weren't being served by what was increasingly sophisticated sort of private equity and litigation funding options.
Mm.
And really, we all came together and said, "This we know what the solution is, so let's see if we can put together that solution." And it's
Hmm.
really an impact litigation fund, but also focuses end to end on development of and working with governments that are often newly democratic, post conflict, transparency focused governments, often in the global south. who
Hmm.
have lost billions of dollars of assets that have been extracted illegally and often end up in the global north and global financial centers.
Mm.
So that's really our focus, is that particular group of people who need that support. And what we do is we work end to end with them, develop claims. We're an asset manager, so those claims go into a fund. We then work with co-investors and we go after the assets. And most of the assets are returned to governments, but our investors do incredibly well as well. But part of the work that we do is really to make sure that money isn't re-corrupted. So we'll work with the governments to set up a sovereign wealth fund, an education fund. Often climate change is a key focus. And so that work end to end, from developing the claim through to litigation or settlement, through to then return of the claim in a way that's transparent and accountable. We're the only ones who do that.
Mm. I want to go a step further here. So, illicit, when you talk about, I don't want to assume anything here. So, when you talk about illicit financial flows, can you go a little bit deeper in that concept for those that are maybe hearing this for the first time, and maybe just one layer deeper on the problem that you just, if you have an example you want to share, welcome to, or you can speak, figuratively speaking, however you want to, but like kind of taking us through a scenario, if you will.
Sure, no, happy to. And in many ways, for all of us who have worked on this, we're so eye deep in the work at this point
Hmm.
that it's really important to take a step back and sort of look at what's going on.
Hmm.
But illicit financial flows, the definition can change, but really what it means is it's where a fraud's been committed, where taxes have been evaded, where license fees haven't been paid, where corruption is potentially part of the equation as well. So, say a large corporate or an individual has paid people essentially to hide money and move that money offshore.
Mm.
And the numbers are pretty staggering. So, the US government thinks that $1 trillion per annum, roughly, is moves through illicit financial flows. So that could be anything from, very sort of dark money, which is serious and organized crime and terror, through to, grayer areas of tax evasion or fraud. But all of that money potentially is, in a sense, running in parallel to the global financial system. But it often ends up in places where in the global north, it can end up in banks, but it also can end up in real estate. So there are a variety of places it ends up, but all of it is illicit, essentially illegal.
Mm.
And for many of these countries, so for example, if illicit financial flows were reversed in Africa, Africa would be a net creditor. So it gives
Hmm.
you a sense of the size. And it's $1 trillion per annum, which, if you think about it, is massive. If that was returned, you could flip a lot of the economics or macroeconomics, global economics on its head.
Mm.
And the global south could potentially end up being creditor or lending money as to being borrowers.
Wow. Let's go further in that because that's interesting to me. And of course, not asking you to have a crystal ball, but where do you see this going? Obviously, you just gave the dream, right? What you just mentioned, that'd be amazing. But where do you see this going? And like, what do you see?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and sort of
Mm.
goes back to what motivated a lot of us, because a lot of us were working in the anti-corruption space for a long time. So the former head of the anti-kleptocracy unit of the FBI was very involved in sort of recovering very large amounts of money that the Department of Justice was able to recover in Nigeria, for example. So she's recovered billions. But she saw the work that we were doing, which was really looking at the private sector and private sector solutions as the next wave of this sort of work. And the way I see it going is, what I'm hoping is we'll be the first of many, because
Mm.
what we're doing is really looking at this problem and saying there's a private sector solution to it, which is investment into essentially a claim, which is a contingent asset on a balance sheet. And then the litigation or the settlement process, where you can go and say, look, guys, you should settle because we have you banked to rights, because the Department of Justice is looking at you and we know that you've admitted on your public filings that you've done something wrong, so let's settle. That next wave is going to be very effective because once people see it and see it working, then you'll get other private players in, and then real money starts coming in a very serious way. So
Mm,
that's affecting global change.
wow.
So, yeah, that's the way I think this will work. So we're the first, but we're hoping others will follow.
Amazing. And you mentioned that you're an asset manager. Maybe talk a little bit about how that piece of it works.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And again, it's the development. We think of the market as well. So where we sit in the space is essentially we sort of sit between impact funding, asset management, and well, I would say private capital or litigation funding. So
Hmm.
litigation funding originally started and was started by bankers and lawyers who were familiar with litigation, where the upfront cost of litigation is very high.
Hmm.
And it's high risk, but the rewards are very high. So, particularly when you start bringing litigation in Europe or the US, where potentially you can get treble damages or punitive damages. So, the private sector and litigation funders were lending money to essentially to plaintiffs or claimants who were then litigating. And what we've done, and we've done this really with the advice and counsel of the governments that we work with, is we, rather than lend money, we actually move the claims into a special purpose vehicle. And that vehicle we manage. So as a result, we hire the lawyers and the investigators and we drive the process of litigation or settlement or renegotiation, say, for a contract. And at the end of that process, our investors will receive their money back, plus, so they'll receive very good IRR. And then the governments receive, the vast majority of the money. So it's about 70% net. But the investors still do incredibly well. But then the governments receive this money, and we have an agreement with them that once it's returned, it can be returned into a sovereign wealth fund or an education fund. But that sort of control then passes over to the governments, but then it potentially goes into another asset management structure. Or, potentially it could repay debt. So a
Mm.
lot of governments are really struggling with this debt overhang and using the assets, these contingent assets to sort of renegotiate debt is something that a lot of them are thinking about at the moment.
Mm. Well, Catherine, I mean, this has been enlightening for myself and I hope for my audience as well. And I'm just happy to bring the story of Restitution Capital to our listeners. That being said, if people are listening or watching and if they want to follow up and if they want to learn more, how do they do that or follow the work?
Yeah, so thank you for phrasing that because we had just changed our website.
Hey, I
So
like a good rebrand. I like a good website
exactly.
update. Come on.
Yeah, so you can find us at restitutionimpact.org. And we have email on there. So if people are interested in following up or want to hear more about us, then please do email us. It would be fantastic to hear it. And then, Adam, just in terms of personal note for me, so a lot of the work that I had been doing with governments before was really helping them figure out what sort of assets they had. So I did a lot of work when the Soviet Union sort of came apart with various countries, and also did work in Iraq as well post conflict. And really, that's where a lot of this started, was just understanding that governments, when they started looking at their balance sheets, said, my God, there's no money. So, and that's really where restitution started as well, is that, this is a tool in the toolbox for them that is the most sophisticated tool that the most sophisticated private sector actors use. So we're giving it and providing that support to people. And our governments are carefully vetted. So we work with governments that are transparency focused and like minded, but it's a private sector tool that they've never really had before. And a lot of them have said, so finally, this is something where we've been beat up, and this was a direct
Mm,
quote, but finally we have somebody on our side who can
mm.
help.
Catherine, this is great. For everybody listening, just so you know, we'll definitely put some of those links to the website. And that website one more time, Catherine.
Oh, give me a
Come on.
second.
Get it out there.
Yeah, I know. I have to memorize this as bad
That
CEOs.
website one more time because I want to make sure that the audience gets it because people are driving in their car, they're listening at the gym. I want them to go check it out.
Yeah, so it's restitutionimpact.org.
Fantastic. Restitutionimpact.org. Our team will definitely put that link in the show notes so that the audience can follow along. And speaking of the audience, if this is your first time with Mission Matters and you haven't done it yet, hit that subscribe or follow button. This is a daily show. Each and every day, we're bringing you new content, new ideas, and hopefully new inspiration to help you along the way on your journey as well. So again, hit that subscribe or follow button. And Catherine, thanks again for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. I've been listening to a lot of your podcasts. They're great. They're very inspirational.